106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you, and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
And now it's time for Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
During his 2016 campaign, Trump ran on the slogan, "I'm with you." It seemed ridiculous for this selfish and self-centered con man to present himself as being for.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
With me in the Tan Talk studio today, my co-host, attorney and former circuit judge, Kevin Carey. Kevin, the outcome of the Texas primary saw Attorney General Ken Paxton, who, other than Donald Trump, is probably the most corrupt politician in America today, not surprisingly defeating Texas Senator John Cornyn in a 64-36 landslide. Tuesday's Republican primary runoff, which is an outcome that Senate GOP leaders fear could cost their party control of a crucial Senate seat and divert much-needed money from other battlegrounds. Cornyn has now become the first elected senator in Texas to lose re-election since 1970. But really, Paxton, who's now going to take on Representative James Tallarico, won that Democratic nomination outright in March, is going to probably end up costing the Republican Party a tremendous amount of money to try to hold that seat Republican. You have any idea what these numbers are?
Well, I will say a couple things, Ed, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time this is being shown or heard. Well, it's very clear that it's one thing, Ed. It's Trump's retribution tour. He doesn't care about how it affects the party. There's no question the polls have shown that Democrats were very happy to see this criminal, the Attorney General who was indicted, impeached, be the candidate. Tallarico polled much poorer against Cornyn, who was a relatively moderate senator who was very close to being the Senate Majority Leader rather than John Thune. John Thune wasn't happy about this at all, by the way, that you've got Trump, Ed, picking off these sitting senators. And then you also have the fact that now Tallarico's running against a non-incumbent. So I was a little surprised that the percentage was as high as it was, but it certainly strokes Trump's ego, but it doesn't help the party.
Lone Star Democrats were already hoping that Crooked Donald's poor approvals ratings nationwide and Tallarico's strong fundraising would give them an opening to score their first statewide victory since 1994, even before it became clear that Cornyn was done for. Later this hour, we're going to hear from Anders Croy of Florida Watch, and he'll review the budget passed by the Florida State Legislature. And in our second hour, we're going to look at the 5 reasons that Crooked Donald wanted to become president. Plus, we'll check in on the climate report, consumer spending numbers, and lots more here on The Voice of Reason. But right now, Kevin, let's have a look at the astonishing levels of crime and corruption that Senate candidate Ken Paxton has engaged in. He has dutifully checked all the boxes for crime and infidelity necessary to cement his support within the Republican Party. So he's a serious
Well, I agree with
candidate.
that. You think at some point the Republicans would say enough's enough when you've got a convicted felon in the White House, though that seems to be the primary. Yeah. Who, by the way, is not just a convicted felon. He acts like a mob boss, and is in everything he does, including this horrible war in Iran, which he's got no plan for getting us out of. But when you look at Paxton, it's incredible. And Cornyn, he was kissing Trump's tail as best he can. Trump waited until about 2 weeks ago to endorse Paxton, but there was no doubt that Paxton was going to be endorsed by Trump, and there was no doubt that Paxton would beat Cornyn, which is a big deal. But that does put Texas in play as you mentioned earlier about the Senate, and the other point, which I think is important and you raised as well. Even if, let's say, Paxton wins, they've got to put a lot of money, many millions, into Texas that they would not have to do in the past, and that may hurt in Maine, North Carolina, Alaska, Iowa, Nebraska, all states that are in play.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the Democrats will need to put a lot of money in also. Is it worth it to them to try to win that seat?
Well, I think so, and I think they've made that decision to do so because particularly now, I think when they look at the polls showing that Paxton is certainly more beatable. I mean, I don't know what the line is for these MAGA people. I mean, keep in mind, Ed, this is a primary, so the people that voted last Tuesday were MAGA people. They weren't the people. They were not the majority of people that are going to be voting in November.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we could spend 2 hours on Paxton. He was a Texas House member in 2008. The Associated Press reported that he and another lawmaker had investments in a company that received millions from state contracts that Paxton had voted on through state spending bills. Again, I'm not sure why. It's not a problem for voters in Texas. Paxton had profited from the contracts through a company called WatchGuard, which is a video equipment company that supplies police stations secured while he was in office. His investment in the company came to light after a competing company sued, saying that the contract bidding was rigged in Watchdog's favor, which I don't have any doubt it was. Paxton claimed that he had no knowledge of the company's state contracts at the time, which he would have been required to disclose under the Texas ethics to the Texas Ethics Commission under state law. In contrary to what he was saying, if you looked at the WatchGuard's website, it was boasting that the company was, quote, held by an influential shareholder group that includes 3 state representatives. After coming under scrutiny, Paxton shifted his investments, including in WatchGuard, into a blind trust in 2015. Well, however, the texts that were discovered thereafter between Paxton and the trustee, who's a friend of his, which is by itself as an attorney, I can say the trustee should not be just a personal friend of the party the trustee is working for, concerning his stock trades in 2020, a violation of the blind nature of this arrangement or supposed arrangement. And Paxton received $2.2 million from this investment in WatchGuard when the company was bought out in 2019.
No wonder he's got so many houses on an attorney general's salary. The year he assumed the office of attorney general also kicked off a 9-year legal saga over securities fraud felony charges. Paxton was indicted in the late summer of 2015 over accusations of defrauding investors. Here's the story. The charges stemmed from accusations that he had encouraged other legislators to invest in McKinney-based company Severgy in 2011 without telling them that he'd make a commission. Paxton allegedly misrepresented himself as an investor in the company, which was charged with fraud by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission in 2016. Then Paxton and Republican supporters painted the indictment as a partisan attack by Democrats.
Well, that's the standard line.
That's the standard playbook. That's right.
Anything that's even legitimate is a partisan attack by the Democrats.
Weaponizing the Justice Department. Well, after pleading not guilty to the charges, the case was stalled by disputes over how much the prosecutor should be paid, following pushback by commissioners in Paxton's hometown of Collin County. Back and forth changes to the legal venue between Collin County and Houston further delayed the case, which is why it ran on so long. So after 9 years, during which time Paxton was reelected as Attorney General twice, Paxton finally struck a deal with prosecutors in 2024, agreeing to pay about $300,000 in restitution and do community service with local food pantry organizations to get the charges dropped. He continued to characterize the case as political prosecution upon its settlement.
Yeah, one thing I want to emphasize there, Ed, is the term restitution. You remember when, as you know, like a drunken sailor, Trump issues these pardons because he knows it's one of the few things he can do that has no oversight by either of the other 2 branches of government. So again, like when Trump was pardoning and taking away the restitution, they're victims of these crimes. Just like here, they're victims of these crimes. I don't know where the bridge too far is for these people. I got, I have a sister in Dallas who texted me the other night and said, I can't believe that they're okay with a criminal now being their nominee for the U.S. Senate. And you look at John Cornyn, what has he done to deserve getting ousted in a primary, other than he hasn't been deferential enough to Trump?
Well, he voted to convict Trump's impeachment, a second impeachment, when he implemented the riot.
Right.
He attempted an insurrection. As far as I'm concerned, Trump should have faced a firing squad for that. This country shouldn't tolerate people trying to steal our government from us.
There's no question about that.
Instead, he ends up back in the White House.
So what the sin Cornyn apparently did was he voted his conscience, which more senators should have. They all should have. I mean, shame on them for not understanding, killing police officers on January 6th and undermining the entire government somehow has been whitewashed. And not only that, they've now been pardoned, and now they're getting a slush fund of money. It's just incredible.
Exactly. And so anyway, let's go on.
So
and see some other things that he's done.
Yeah, in October 2020, a group of conservative attorneys who worked at his office reported him to the FBI, accusing him of bribery and abuse of office. It's one thing if there's something that's raised, as an isolated event, but you can see here these are not isolated events. The FBI began looking into the claims that Paxton had misused his office to aid friends and political donor, a friend Nate Paul, a wealthy Austin real estate developer. The attorneys from Paxton's office claimed Paxton hired an outside lawyer to investigate Paul's claims that the FBI had improperly searched his home. Paul also said in a deposition that Paxton recommended he hire a woman with whom Paxton had an affair in 2018, and Paul has since been charged with the felony of including wire fraud charges. Now, after the allegations spurred an investigation and subsequent impeachment trial, which we all are aware of in 2023, rightly so, just like Trump, subject to two proper impeachment. These weren't hoaxes. The FBI investigation changed hands from Texas's federal prosecutors to the Justice Department, which is, as you know, is just Trump's personal law firm right now.
Right.
And in late 2024, they declined to continue pursuing the case, putting to bed yet another high-stakes probe into this corrupt Texas politician.
And then after reporting Paxton to the FBI in 2020, at least 4 of the attorneys who worked in his office were fired and promptly sued the Attorney General for violating the Texas Whistleblower Act, which prohibits employees from taking action against public employees who report violations of the law. The lawsuit made its way to the Texas Supreme Court in 2023 before Paxton agreed to pay the attorneys $3,300,000 and issue an apology. However, the payment would come out of state funds and required approval of the Texas legislature. So after the agreement was made, State Representative Jeff Leach, who oversees the House Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committee, felt, quote, troubled that hardworking taxpayers might be on the hook for this settlement between the Attorney General and former employees of his office, unquote. So as the whistleblower case and FBI investigations led the legislature into its own impeachment trial of Paxton in 2023, the lawsuit bounced around the legal system until in April of 2025, a judge ruled against Paxton and ordered a payout of now $6,600,000 to the fired attorneys. Paxton initially appealed the ruling, calling it ridiculous judgment that is not based on the facts or the law, but dropped the appeal in July, leaving the legislature once again to foot the multi-million-dollar bill. You know, that it reminds me of the attorneys that Kash Patel is firing for doing their jobs. And Cornyn was subscribing to his oath of office when he voted for Trump's removal and conviction on charges of inciting a riot and trying to take over the government. So when these people do what they're hired to do, they end up getting fired.
Well, it's consistent with what's happening in the administration with Trump. Just he's gutting these departments like the Department of Justice, and not surprisingly, he's a lawyer, and we've talked many times on this show that these attorneys are going to be looking at bar issues over various states. I think Pam Bondi's got some issues. We talked about Todd Blanche having issues. Both have their pending bar complaints already filed against both of them. And consistent with that, the State Bar of Texas filed a complaint against Paxton for professional misconduct in 2022 after he brought a lawsuit against Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin over this discredited 2020 election fraud claim, which, again, at what point do they decide, kissing Trump's ass is all I care about because I want power, period. The U.S. Supreme Court threw out the lawsuit saying Texas lacked the standing to sue other states over their election procedures. And think about that, Ed, for a minute. And you don't have to be a lawyer to understand this.
Right.
What right, and this was an issue Bondi had, what right do they have to get involved in any way with any other state's election process? Yeah, I don't know if you recall, we talked about last week, the DOJ is now trying to, which will fail, by the way. This is one of these Steve Miller, 2025 schemes to say that no bar association, which has exclusive jurisdiction over a lawyer in that state, and also the Supreme Court of that state, I'm sure you've seen this, saying that they could not in any way get involved with an attorney for the DOJ, that's not going to go anywhere, but it just shows the arrogance that they have. The Texas bar's lawsuit stemmed from complaints over Paxton's lawsuit over money and time spent investigating false claims about this 2020 election result. Again, keep in mind, Ed, there have been over 60 lawsuits that were filed in 2020, and all of them failed. Trump, in his retribution tour, keeps making even federal judge nominees, and they look foolish, say before the Senate Judiciary Committee, "Oh, I can't say for sure who won the election. I know that Biden was sworn in." The Texas Supreme Court dismissed the Texas bar's complaint in January of last year on the grounds that the sanction would violate the Texas Constitution's separation of powers doctrine. But again, when there's smoke, there's fire. It's interesting, if you follow this race at all, Cornyn, and as you mentioned, Ed, millions of dollars were spent just on the primary, let alone now what's going to happen in the general. But he went after more of I think the personal side of this. If you saw any of his ads about the adultery with the affairs, and obviously Paxton has problems keeping a marriage commitment, but he seemed to focus more on that than I think he should have focused more on these financial issues.
Yeah. Let's now backtrack to May 2023. After the mounting FBI investigation and whistleblower lawsuit, the Texas House Investigation Committee unveiled, get ready for this, 20 articles of impeachment against Paxton based on the abuse of office and bribery charges. 20 articles of impeachment.
That's incredible.
The investigation centered around Paxton misusing his office to aid with Nate Paul's legal issues. The guy you mentioned earlier, the House voted 121 to 33 to impeach Paxton, suspending him from office. Let me remind you, this guy was the Attorney General of the state of Texas. Okay,
but also these House were primarily these were primarily Republicans,
yes,
his fellow party members.
Yes. So anyway, they suspended him from office. And it marked only the third time in history the legislative body has impeached an official there in Texas. It was then kicked to the Texas Senate, requiring a trial and 2/3 of senators' approval to permanently remove Paxton from office, same as in the United States Senate.
Right.
So after a 2-week Senate trial, September 2023, Paxton was acquitted of all charges and restored to office after none of the articles met the 21 votes necessary. The trial included witnesses who gave testimony to Paxton's alleged attempts to investigate Paul's enemies, delay foreclosures of his properties, and dig into police investigations of Paul, as well as allegations that Paul paid for Paxton's home renovations and covered up his affair in return. Only 2 Republican senators voted in favor of Paxton's conviction. I wonder whatever became of them.
Well, the felon Trump hid behind the same defense that the criminal Paxton has hid behind, which is that 2/3 majority, which is hard to achieve in the Senate. But shame on the Senate Republicans. Only 2 voted in favor of Paxton's conviction, when certainly the facts presented that. This, again, Trump is nothing more than a mob boss. He's going to pay a heavy price in November. And at some point, this Republican Party needs to understand it can't just be a cult for Trump, or it's going to keep losing elections.
Then let's go to July
we
2025, Kevin.
It's like we keep banging with the baseball bat. It's just incredible. And any one of these things. And I spent part of my career as a circuit judge, and I understand that you have to separate facts from opinion, but these are very strong facts. And yet at some point you say, when there's obviously, when there's smoke here, there's fire. And I think you made probably the most important point. And again, having, my grandfather, was Attorney General of New York, I have great respect for that office. And I think the fact that Trump and the governor of Texas has made that office nothing more than a place for political flunkies is just unconscionable. But back on the facts, July of last year, the Attorney General's wife, who was a state senator, which is interesting, Angela Paxton, took to social media to announce she was filing for divorce. And again, normally you try and separate the two, but in this case, it's consistent with Paxton, with his conduct. In her post, she wrote, "Today, after 38 years of marriage, I filed for divorce on biblical grounds." Not sure exactly what she means by that. I can make some assumptions. But I believe marriage is a sacred covenant, and I've earnestly pursued reconciliation. But in light of recent discoveries, and keep in mind, this is his wife saying this, in light of recent discoveries, I do not believe that it honors God or is loving to myself, my children, or Ken to remain in the marriage. Again, that's not too attacking, but the facts are what they are. Although Angela Paxton did not expand on what she meant by recent discoveries, the divorce announcement came after years of publicly reported infidelity by her husband. And again, infidelity by politicians is nothing new, sadly, and both Democrats and Republicans are guilty of that over the years. In 2018, Paxton gathered his staff and, with his wife by his side, confessed to them that he had been having an affair and promised to recommit to his marriage. Then the swirling allegations concerning Paxton's aide to Nate Paul brought his relationship with a former Senate aide into the national spotlight. House impeachment managers alleged that Paxton had asked Paul to hire the woman so she could move to Austin, which is the capital of Texas, and that Paul and Paxton had shared a secret Uber account that Paxton used to meet with the woman. So there were monies being used, state monies. Through her husband's Senate trial, where the affair allegations played a key role, Angela Paxton sat stoically, recused from voting, but listening to the proceedings. She tweeted biblical verses throughout the trial. After Paxton's acquittal, and again, when I say acquittal, that doesn't mean he's innocent. It means that you couldn't get 2/3 of the senators that had the guts to do what they should have done, disputed many of the allegations against him, but not the infidelity. So, that's not the primary allegation, but it certainly shows a lack of character.
Yeah. Now, in Trump's retribution tour and weaponization of the Justice Department, he's trying to bring charges of mortgage fraud against Letitia James and I think Adam Schiff and maybe Comey, but that's the best that they can come up with. And they're very flimsy charges. Well, you're just not going to believe this one, Kevin. 2 weeks after Angela Paxton announced she was filing divorce, an Associated Press investigation revealed that the Paxtons had been claiming, wait for it, 3 different homes, one in Dallas and 2 of them in Austin, as their primary residence, saving them thousands of dollars in mortgage loan payments. I believe that's called mortgage fraud, right?
Yes, it is.
Is he being prosecuted by our Justice Department? Hell no, because he's a Republican, and they're trying to create the illusion that only Democrats commit crimes and Republicans never do. Bunk. Paxton was also simultaneously collecting tax breaks on 2 different homes in 2018 via a homestead exemption that is only meant for a single primary residence. Other properties the Paxtons own, including a multi-million-dollar, well, I shouldn't say multi, it's $1 million luxury cabin in Oklahoma, and a home in College Station, have been listed on rental sites in violation of each residence's mortgage. Paxton bought the Oklahoma luxury home in 2022, but failed to disclose the property in his required annual transparency report to the state. Additionally, a home right here in Tampa owned by the Paxtons, as well as 4 other properties across Hawaii, Utah, and Florida, were not disclosed by Paxton. I'm sure he just kind of forgot about them.
Ed, as a public official, when I was served on the circuit bench, I had to file an annual report every year, and you take it seriously.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you have to.
Do
You have
that.
to. They have a right to know. Just like you see the shenanigans with Clarence Thomas and Alito and Roberts with the Supreme Court, and then their improper gaining of financial benefit through their office. But yes, my point is you take it seriously. I believe you sign it even under oath, where you're subject to to prosecution if you don't tell the truth. And we would take that, and I would take it very seriously. Again, at some point, apparently there's nothing that, and maybe I'd ask you that question, is there anything we could both ask ourselves rhetorically, anything that Paxton could do that would deter these MAGA Republicans? Keep in mind, this was not the general election. These are MAGA Republicans who voted in the primary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think my answer to that question is I don't think there's anything short of him killing somebody or sexually assaulting somebody, but I think he did it like Trump. Trump certainly was guilty of sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
So I know our time is short. Talking
we just
about
have one more.
His misconduct when he campaigned for the U.S. Senate this year as sitting, as you mentioned, as sitting Attorney General. He used the Attorney General's office to file a flurry of lawsuits against everyone from doctors to tech companies and local school districts. So that's the Trump playbook: is you sue everybody, even though they're all frivolous cases. Over the span of 2 days in February, he took legal action against Bexar County over a legal defense fund for immigrants, asked a judge to declare a Muslim civil rights group to be declared a foreign terrorist organization, and demanded records from a Houston anti-fascist group that posts information about alleged neo-Nazis online. Paxton also launched an investigation into Austin Independent School District in early February over a student walkout to protest immigration and customs enforcement, demanding documents from the district. And on February 16th, he announced he being Paxton announced he'd be investigating 3 other Texas school districts that also saw protests. He said in a statement, "I will not allow Texas schools to become breeding grounds for the radical left's open borders agenda." Mm-hmm. So again, abuse of his office.
Yeah. Now you've heard the really childish and immature comments that he's made about Tallarico since he won the primary, right? These are just really vacuous insults against his opponent for the U.S. seat. Tallarico, on the other hand, demonstrated that he's a mature candidate who addresses the issues instead of engaging in childish name calling.
Well,
Paxton is the most corrupt politician in America. He is abnormal. His crimes are egregious. And he is everything that's wrong with our broken system. I'll be the first to admit that I missed the mark on some of those old statements. But what Ken Paxton is doing is clipping my cringy comments to distract from his career of corruption. Ken Paxton has a criminal record. I have a legislative record. So while he tries to divide us with the same old, tired culture war fights, I'm going to keep bringing Texans together to tackle corruption and lower our costs.
Yeah, I mean, Tallarico's running a very good campaign. You mentioned about the amount of money Democrats need to spend. He is raising money. He's had a strong ability to raise money. He doesn't have all this dead wood that Paxton has. So again, Democrats, we're happy that they just followed the Trump cult line and bringing in Paxton versus Cornyn.
It's going to be a remarkable race, isn't it? And of course, it happens on November 3rd of this year. You're listening to The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me, Ed Golly. My co-host is Kevin Carey, and it's time for a quick timeout. When we return, we're going to hear from Anders Croy of Florida Watch, who will fill us in on the state legislature's budget for next year, along with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
It's time for Poll Watch, and very quickly, Did you know, Kevin, that 64% of adults are worried about being able to afford health care costs? The same percentage are worried about gasoline or other transportation costs. And 61% say health care costs will influence which party's candidate they support. And remember, these are issues that no other populations in industrial nations worry about because they all have universal health care.
Well, it should be on Trump's tombstone. The rich get richer and the poor get poor, and the middle class dissolves. There was a University of Michigan poll yesterday that showed even though the stock market has been increasing, the percentage of the general people that think the economy is getting better is at an all-time low. So there's this great divide between those who, the rich, and that's who, Trump promised the rich and the oil companies that they would get tax breaks and he would take care of them. And that's exactly what he's done.
Yeah. 38% of Americans say Trump keeps his promises. That's kind of remarkable. That's down from 51% shortly after the 2024 election. A quarter of Americans say he's a good role model, and 34% describe him as honest. You've got to be kidding me. Every word he says is a lie, and a third of Americans drink the Kool-Aid. Unbelievable. Just 44% say he's mentally sharp, and that has dropped 11 points since the 2024 election.
Well, 34% you're saying in terms of that he's honest, that's MAGA. And again, they're just all in a cult. Nothing he would do would faze them. But the problem that he's got is that there's 34% is not enough to get. It's not 50%. And the vast majority of the public, including, and we've talked about, Ed, as you know, independents, he's in serious trouble with them. He's also in serious trouble when you look even at Texas, when they were trying to cheat and redistrict as they've done in midstream, that they're assuming the Latina vote is going to necessarily go for Trump, which is a false assumption given what's happened between the economy and the abuses on the immigration laws.
The Florida legislature has passed its budget for the upcoming fiscal year, and joining us now from Tallahassee is Anders Croy of Florida Watch to kind of really fill us in on some of the details of that. Anders, I appreciate your time today. Thank you for checking in with us.
Good morning, Anders. Thanks again.
Thank you guys. Yeah, good morning, and thank you guys for having me back again.
Our pleasure. I don't know if you want to start with this issue that the governor, who's going to be turned out of the office after 8 years, is trying to leave his imprint on the race for his replacement by unveiling his long-awaited plan to slash local property taxes. He was right here in Tampa this week saying that it's good for everybody, red, blue, none of the above. You're going to get the property tax relief. And I don't think it's a partisan issue. He's pitching the homestead exemption of property taxes up to $500,000. Kevin and I think maybe that's because he wants to give the state even more control over the local communities if they've got to get their money from the state. But where does that stand, and what do you think is behind that, if anything?
Well, we've heard the governor talking about this plan of a plan to potentially eliminate property taxes for more than a year now. He announced that in March of last year at the Realtors headquarters, I should note, in Orlando, that he wanted to eliminate all property taxes in Florida. Well, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that that was not a doable plan, that doing that would bankrupt local governments throughout the state, would hurt local communities, and that there was not going to be the legislative support or the support of the people of Florida that he needed for that plan. So we have heard him hemming and hawing for the better part of a year now, saying that he's going to come up with a plan that will cut property or homestead property taxes here in Florida. Yesterday, we did see an outline of what we expect that to look like. The governor has called a special session for next week that will last from Monday through Wednesday. The Senate president has announced that they are waiting for the governor to transmit the proposal to them, that they will then introduce it and it will be passed pretty easily in the Senate. We haven't heard really much from the House yet. And as you and your listeners may know, the House Speaker, Daniel Perez, and the governor have been feuding pretty hard for the last 2 years, ever since Speaker Perez took over. So it remains to be seen what the House is going to be doing with this. But the larger and broader point here is the reason that we're talking about property taxes is because Republicans in Florida have refused to put forward any real solutions to the affordability crisis that are facing our state. They're also using this as a distraction from their inability to solve the property insurance crisis that continues to go on in Florida. Over the last 5 years, we have seen property insurance rates increase by more than 100% statewide. Floridians are paying more than 5 times the national average when it comes to property insurance. And what you've seen from this legislature and this governor is instead of doing real things to lower rates, to hold these companies accountable, they've given them giveaways. They've made it almost impossible to sue insurance companies when they deny legitimate claims now. They gave them a $3 billion taxpayer-funded bailout. And now they want to come back and they want to put this burden onto local communities. Floridians are working harder than ever during an affordability crisis, and they deserve practical solutions that lower costs for everyone. But eliminating property taxes is just going to shift costs onto small businesses and renters through new taxes or fees. So we all end up paying more for the local services that we need and rely on. Things like emergency management, our health and hospital system, our local public schools, garbage collection, our public libraries. These are things that people should not have to pay a fee every time they try to access them. But that is what it would look like if we implement what the governor's plan is going to look like. But this is going to go on the ballot. If the legislature does pass it next week, it will need 60% support from the people of Florida. There have been numerous amount of public polls at this point that have shown there is not 60% support for this idea, that Floridians understand that this is not a tax cut, it is a tax shift. You will pay more somewhere else for this. And what you deserve are real affordability solutions. And instead, what you're getting is new taxes and new fees from a Republican legislature and a governor who are fresh out of ideas on how to help the people they're elected to serve.
Yeah, Anders, this is Kevin Carey. Good morning again. Thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it. And you made that point very well even before the legislative session started. My father used to always tell me that there's no free lunch in this world, and I think that's very true. So you've got a state of Florida where there's no state income tax, and now it's you've got a governor saying, well, let's cut out property taxes. Well, your tax base is already fragile, and so I don't know how you can have no state income tax and very little property tax and yet still fund local programs. And I want to just highlight what Ed said when we got started. I think part of this has been a sense of trying for this government, DeSantis, et cetera, to control, as he's done many times, try to control state elected, for example, school board members over the years, this so-called freedom, this free state, which he's trying to control. But it strikes me as just an attempt to more control what's happening at the local level. But you made the point a minute ago, how do you replace the revenues lost with this property tax reduction?
The governor has said that as part of his plan, he wants to create essentially a state trust fund. Because one thing I should point out about the governor's proposal yesterday that was actually different than what the House passed during the regular legislative session is it does not protect funding for local public schools. This plan that has been put forward by the governor is going to devastate public schools that are already dealing with now more than $4 billion a year that have been diverted out of our public schools due to the universal voucher program that was passed a couple years ago, that is now allowing the wealthiest families in Florida to subsidize their private school choices. So there's going to be a real issue for local communities. And that's one thing that I think we should really focus on here. What the governor and what legislative leaders here in Tallahassee are telling these local communities is that they don't know what's best for them, that they don't know how to best spend their money, how to best focus on the needs of the people of their community. If the people in these local areas had problems with how their local communities are spending money, then I'm sure that they would make their voices known at the ballot box, because your local county commissioners, your city commissioners, your school board members. But what the people of Florida have seen time and time again is that politicians in Tallahassee are refusing to fund the priorities in their daily lives, the real things, the real practical solutions that they need. And we're having to rely more and more and more on our local communities to pick ourselves up. This would gut the ability to do that. And it's really just an egregious sort of abdication of duty of what the people are supposed to be doing up here when they are doing your elected business in Tallahassee.
Well, I think as you said, too, I don't think it's going to get 60%. Hopefully DeSantis has learned that he can't steal money from the Medicaid settlement funds anymore. The legislation was passed, so he can't try and game the system as he did last time. But of course, last time he had the easy job of trying to defeat those two amendments. Now he's got to try and get 60%, which I don't think he'll get. And I think the bigger point is what you've also emphasized is that rather than deal with the issues that matter to people in Florida, affordability, insurance, what homeowners insurance, et cetera, health insurance, he's dealing with these issues that are going nowhere anyway. And it's very easy for him to go before the realtors and make these statements. But they're once again, just like in DC with Trump, they're failing to address the issues that matter to the average person.
That's exactly right. I mean, people of Florida deserve serious leaders who are focused on practical solutions and not these partisan politics. But what we've seen time and time again from Florida's Republican lawmakers is that they are just wasting their time in Tallahassee, either fighting amongst themselves or chasing national headlines and clicks on social media instead of fixing the basics in our community. Costs continue to rise. Housing gets further out of reach. Healthcare is more expensive. Gas is $4.50 a gallon. Communities across our state deserve steady leadership that delivers on priorities that matter most. And what they're getting from Tallahassee is grandstanding and more handouts to big special interests instead of actually doing the people's business.
I've always read, and I believe that a budget suggests the priorities of an administration. If we can, Ed, I can ask about what else in the budget jumps out at you, the proposed budget?
Well, this year's budget is about $114.5 billion. That's spending less than they spent last year, which was a big priority of the House Speaker, of the governor. The governor yesterday also promised that he is going to do a lot of vetoes that is going to bring down the overall cost of this budget as well. But one thing I want to talk about is the tax package. Every year there is a tax relief, I should put that in quotes, package that comes through as part of the budget. This year's is about $146 million. But what you're seeing in this budget is not things that really help everyday people. There is a tax break in there for certain tickets to certain tennis tournaments. You can get a tax break on buying a gun silencer over the course of the next year. But these are not things that really help people. Florida's Democratic legislators, going back to the regular legislative session, when the war in Iran kicked off and gas was still below $4 a gallon, called on the state to suspend the state gas tax. That could save Floridians about 25 cents per gallon every time they went to the pump. Now, normally this is a very important tax because it does fund vital and key infrastructure projects throughout the state. But our governor and our state legislative leaders on the Republican side love to talk about the fact that they have maxed out the state's rainy day fund. We have $17.5 billion sitting in our state's rainy day fund right now that could help people. And that's what we could use to backfill that money to give folks a break at the tax when they go to the gas pump right now. The rainy day fund is there to help people in a time of need. And Floridians right now, they need an umbrella. They need something to help them in their day-to-day life as they try to afford to continue to get to work, to put food on the table, to buy their kids the things that they need in their day-to-day life. And so what you're really seeing from this budget is more giveaways to special interests, what's called the sprinkle list, which is a list of projects that are added to the budget just by legislative leadership, completely out of sight of the public before they finalize it, is almost $400 million this year. Those are projects that are, maybe could help a local community, but we don't really know. And they're not things that are going to have a direct impact on people's lives right now as they struggle to pay the bills every single month.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just noticing, I was reading the article in the Tampa Bay Times yesterday, which summarized the budget. And one of the things I noticed is that the Florida Department of Health made dramatic cuts this year in the AIDS Drug Assistance Program, which gives HIV positive Floridians access to life-saving medication. So again, nothing I read here to me is something I think is positive. They're cutting funds for significant assistance to AIDS victims.
One thing I will say is that they have backfilled that money in the final version of the budget. They put in about $75 million that should hopefully cover that over the course of the next year. But the reason they had to scramble to do that is because of what you said. The Department of Health earlier this year, kind of out of nowhere, surprised everybody and said that they no longer had the funding to continue this vital program for public health in the state of Florida. They actually had to pass $30 million in emergency funding during the regular legislative session just to get us to this new budget right now. So it's something where they're not prioritizing the health of the people of Florida. We are still one of 10 states that has not expanded access to Medicaid. We lead the nation in signups for the Affordable Care Act exchange. But with the expiration of the subsidies, the enhanced subsidies at the beginning of this year, people are starting to really get sticker shock. A lot of folks right now, we know about 200,000 people lost their healthcare plans in January when the renewal started, but a lot of people auto-renewed. And now they're starting to see what the real cost of those plans are. And we're expecting another probably 250,000 people to roll off of their healthcare over the next few months. So you've got a real cost issue, a real afford access issue, and it's not being addressed in this budget or by the leadership in Tallahassee.
Now, Alligator Alcatraz is on the verge of being shut down, from what I understand, and the federal government was supposed to pony up some serious money to help with that, and it appears that they're not going to put anything into our coffers for it. So are we eating the whole cost of that whole project from beginning to end?
I believe there was a report that we've now received $64 million, but that is well short of the almost $1 billion that we believe has been spent on this makeshift Everglades detention camp at this point. Reports are that we've been spending $1 million a day on this cruel and inhumane, sort of disaster that's been going on in the Everglades. It's both an economic, environmental, and humanitarian disaster that's going down there. It is absolutely egregious that also your listener should understand this money was drawn from an emergency fund that was supposed to be used in case of natural disasters in the state of Florida. Now, we got very, very lucky last year that we did not have a direct hit from a hurricane in the state of Florida, because that fund would have been emptied out by the money that's been used in this. There are reports that part of the reason this is closing is because the fund, that emergency fund, actually lapsed earlier this year, and vendors are not being paid right now. So what you're really seeing is not the state of Florida or the federal government admitting that this has been a disaster, that it's been a failure. What you're seeing are private vendors who, by the way, had been getting no bid contracts. We paid $92 million as taxpayers for porta potties for this facility. They're really saying that they can't continue to fund this without getting reimbursed. So it's not even the taxpayers of Florida who are shutting this down because we haven't been reimbursed. It's these private vendors who thought they were going to be getting these, really nice no bid contracts for themselves to make huge profits on.
Wow. So the feds have kicked in some money, but not nearly what they committed to and what it's cost us to do it.
The total cost or reimbursement ask, I believe the state has put in at this point is $640 million. The report I saw said that we did get $64 million of that. Now, obviously, other reports show that we've spent more than $1 billion. So, I think it remains to be seen whether we ask for that other $400 million back. Because this, is not something that the state of Florida should have been involved in. As we've talked about earlier on the show here, we are in an affordability crisis in the state. Think about what that $1 billion could have done for the people of Florida. Think about the direct assistance, about the type of workforce programs, about the type of housing programs, food assistance programs that it could have been used for people who are really in need right now.
Yeah.
And instead we've wasted it on this, just egregious display of anti-humanitarianism in the Everglades.
Well, Congressman Frost, who has toured that facility, was quoted in today's Tampa Bay Times as saying, there needs to be accountability for the damage that has already been done here. I think the primary word I would use for the Trump administration is corruption. And I would say the same thing here. Quite a few of these were, as you know, no bid contracts. So I think when the dust settles with this disaster, there's going to be a lot of people that made a lot of money, again, with no bid. So it has been a calamity. And keep in mind too, there was a federal lawsuit brought by the Indians down there and others because of the damage done to the the very fragile Everglades environment. Judge threw that case out because the court said it wasn't a federal issue because these weren't federal funds being used. Now the state can't have their cake and eat it too. They were seeking federal reimbursement, and as you mentioned, they have gotten some federal reimbursement. But this opened to the flurry of everyone, Trump included, down there with what a great idea this was, and what it's closing with its tail between its legs.
And absolutely, there needs to be accountability when it comes to this. Jose Javier Rodriguez, who's the Democratic candidate for Attorney General, has been talking about making sure that we have accountability when it comes to what has happened here with these contracts, but also with the way that we have treated these detainees who have been down there. I believe there is a federal investigation right now going on by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and another one of his colleagues at the national level, trying to look at what's going on there. There have been reports, I believe from Amnesty International, that there has been torture that has gone on at this facility. So there's going to need to be a lot of accountability at the end of everything. And, we talked about this money coming from the emergency fund earlier. Florida's CFO, a man by the name of Blazing Golly, who was a state senator and was appointed to this position by Governor Ron DeSantis, he is actually required through his office to do an audit every single year and present that to the legislature and the public of how money was spent out of the emergency fund. He has not done that. Instead, he has been traveling the state berating local communities for how they've chosen to spend their limited resources to try to help people during this time of incredible economic uncertainty in the state of Florida. There really needs to be sort of a reckoning for all of the people at the top of the ticket and throughout the state. And, I think the people of Florida have really woken up over the last year and a half or so. I think they're really starting to get involved, really see the corruption, the chaos that is taking place here in Tallahassee, that is really a symptom of what's going on in Washington and what national Republican politics look like now. And I think they're ready for change at the ballot box next year. And I hope we're going to really see a very strong turnout and a very strong, showing from the people of Florida about what they want for the future of our state.
Which leads to my last question. How does Florida Watch evaluate the redistricting that's going on in this state with respect to how this election may turn out?
Well, I try not to be a pundit when it comes to what these districts are going to look like at the end of the day. But what I can tell you is this, no matter what excuses we heard from the governor or Republicans in the state, it doesn't change the facts of what these maps are. They were passed in direct response to the president's call to gerrymander districts to help Republicans, and that should be illegal under Florida's constitution. Now, unfortunately, this week we had a motion for injunction against these maps being put in place that was rejected by a judge, a DeSantis appointed judge here in Tallahassee. But it's really, again, egregious that Florida's Republican lawmakers, this governor, these politicians in Tallahassee have chose to waste taxpayer dollars on a political power grab that will hurt voters instead of focusing on those practical solutions to solve the real affordability issues impacting our state. Now, again, I don't want to get into what the numbers are on these maps, but what I can tell you is this. I watched special elections earlier this year where Democrats won in districts that heavily favored Donald Trump and Republicans in the previous election cycle. And I think folks are going to be really, really surprised when we get the results in November, because the people of Florida are showing that they are ready for real change and real leadership here in the state.
Wow. Tell us about Florida Watch before we leave you today.
Well, Florida Watch is a good government organization that tries to keep an eye on what's going on with our elected officials here in Florida. We try to provide accountability to ensure that taxpayer dollars are being well spent, and that to ensure that every Floridian has the freedom to be healthy, prosperous, and safe. If you'd like to become a part of our mission and help us out, you can go to floridawatch.org. That's floridawatch.org. And you can find us on all of our social media accounts there as well.
Well, I sure want to thank you, Anders Croy of Florida Watch, for joining us today here on The Voice of Reason. We've got to wrap it up because we've got news coming up. And we sure look forward to speaking with you again in the future as events evolve here in the state of Florida.
Thank y'all for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Sure enough. Great to hear from you. Anders Croy of Florida Watch, floridawatch.org. This whole issue of Alcatraz, and these concentration camps does seem to be having an effect, Kevin, because more than 80,000 people abandoned their immigration cases and opted to voluntarily depart the United States between January of 2025 and March of this year. And about 7 times the number of immigrants who did so in the last 15 months of the Biden administration. More than 70% of those granted a voluntary departure order by an immigration judge in the second Trump administration were being held in detention when they made the request.
Well, keep in mind, too, Ed, these immigration judges, they're not Article 3 federal judges. And what happens if Trump and his cronies don't like what a judge does and that they're independent, they get rid of them. So these are all people that are appointed by the Attorney General.
Yeah.
So, but all you need to know about Trump is what he said. What he said, quote, "We need to get them the hell out of here." That's what he said. And we have him on here saying that. Keep in mind, too, the more recent issues is they're now saying, Ed, that if you want to seek a green card, you've got to leave the country and come back. So everything they're doing is to make it harder for immigrants to come to this country.
That was his primary campaign issue, and it's one that he is fulfilling. Well, it's time for a short break for national and international news now from America's premier propaganda network, Fox Fake News. And when we return with the second hour of The Voice of Reason, we're going to reveal the 5 reasons why Trump wanted to become president last year. I'm Ed Golly, inviting you to stay with me, my co-host Kevin Carey, here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We'll return with that and the annual report on the climate change, or the latest reports on it, and a lot more of the issues that conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
It's an egregious ceasefire violation. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. That's what the U.S. military says about Iran targeting a commercial ship with drones. The drones were shot down by American forces, and then Iran fired missiles at Kuwait that country shot down. And Fox's Trey Yingst reports from Tel Aviv.
The exchange of fire comes amid efforts to reach a deal between the United States and Iran, and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran's largest proxy, Hezbollah. The IDF overnight launched a series of heavy strikes targeting the southern Lebanese city of Tyre and further north in Sidon after evacuation orders were given. At least 8 people were killed.
Now, that continued volatility amid talks trying to end that conflict has oil prices rising back up this morning. And we have new updates to the economy. Fox's Ginny Casola has them.
The numbers on inflation and the economy are mixed. The PCE price index for April found inflation up 0.4%, a little lighter than expected. For the year ending in April, though, the increase was 3.8%. Also, the gross domestic product for the start of the year has been revised lower. Economic growth measured by the GDP came in at 1.6%.
That is less than expected and less than the initial 2% GDP report. The days-long anti-ICE protest rages on outside an immigration detention facility in Newark, New Jersey.
Quit your job and kill yourself! Quit your job and kill yourself!
As protesters confront ICE agents angry over reports some detainees inside are on a hunger strike over living conditions, which Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen denies are bad, telling Fox.
Not only we provide them a safe place to stay and the food and a place to sleep, but we're also giving them a convenience store to be able to buy products out of. So we're going above and beyond.
Breaking tennis news out of Paris. Jannik Sinner, the number 1 men's seed at the French Open, just lost, knocked out in the second round of the second Grand Slam tournament of the year. America's listening to Fox News.
I move mountains for a living. Literally. That means I don't carry hand lotion, and when it comes to serious heartburn, I don't mess around with anything but Rolaids Max Strength. Its dual-active formula has 1,500 milligrams of calcium carbonate and magnesium hydroxide that relieves heartburn fast. And the best part? The roll fits right here in my pocket, so I can get back to moving mountains.
Rolaids spells powerful relief. 1,500 milligrams is our highest amount of antacid per tablet. Read each label. Use as directed. Keep out of reach of children.
My name is Whitney Allen, and I'm a widow. My husband, Ryan, died. We never thought we'd ever have to use life insurance, but the unexpected happened. With Ethos, signing up was fast and 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. No medical exams, and you can get up to $3 million worth of coverage. I'm grateful we were prepared.
Get your free quote at ethos.com/term. That's ethos.com/term. Paid spokesperson. Time spent on application may vary. Online health questions required.
Did you ever think about hosting your very own radio show? Here's how.
Hey, Tampa Bay, did you know you can have a 1-hour program on the Tan Talk Radio Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations? That's right. We'll put you on the radio for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many stations. Check it out today. Use your program to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business. Call Lola Jean, the broadcast queen, 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola Jean now to check out your Tan Talk Network program. In addition to network radio, we'll stream your program in audio and video all over the world. Call Lola Jean now, 727-510-7622. Call today. Your network 1-hour program can start tomorrow. Broadcast your message in audio and video on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio.
Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you.
So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show.
We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Hey everyone, it is Brandy Joy with the Brandy Joy Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard, and of course we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you, and let's have some fun.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
And with me in the Tan Talk studio, my co-host, attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey. Well, Kevin, you can indeed fool some of the people all the time. But despite former President Lincoln's misguided adage, you cannot fool all of the people all the time or ever. Crooked Donald fooled about half of our population into electing him president by convincing them that he's a brilliant businessman, and that such a businessman, instead of a politician, should be running the country. Wrong both times. First of all, he's probably one of the worst businessmen in the history of Western economics. Every business he ever ran has failed. He typically gets investors to go into the business, gets the business running, sucks all the money out of it, puts it in his pocket, and then takes his trip to the bankruptcy court and sticks the bank or the investors with the losses. And he's kind of doing the same thing with the country. I just heard only a couple of days ago that of the $39+ trillion of debt that we have in this country, almost 1/3 of it has come about under a Trump presidency, either the first or this second 2.0 presidency. And yet he was elected because people thought, oh, he's a businessman. He'll know how to balance the books and clean up the waste and the fraud and the corruption and straighten everything out. And he even promised he would never sign a budget that wasn't balanced. But now he doesn't give a damn how much debt he accrues every year. He doesn't care, because it's just something like, just as he runs his businesses, he's going to dump that on somebody else and let them worry about how to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, with Trump, the bankruptcies speak for themselves, how you lose money in casinos in New Jersey. But, he had a number of businesses that failed. What actually made him money was just licensing agreements, which he had nothing to do with it. He was licensing his name. And we've talked about last week that one of his primary goals now is just to make as much money through corruption as he can for him and his children and associates, which is, we've talked about that many times on this show.
Yeah. Well, I've boiled it down to 5 reasons. I'm going to run through them and then we'll talk about them individually. Number 1 is to avoid prison, where he should be serving, in my opinion, 3 life sentences plus 30 years for all the crimes he's committed against this country. Number 2, retribution against the people who sought to put him in prison where he belongs because he violated the laws of this country. Number 3, what you just pointed out, grifting as much money as he can. As some say, we're not being governed, we're being looted. Number 4, to remove brown people and minorities from America and make America a whites-only culture, or MAWA, make America white again. And 5, to build monuments to himself. Why? Because he will prove that he's such an incompetent president that he thinks, well, if he leaves these enormous monuments all over Washington and names buildings and things for himself and airports and roads, then future generations will conclude he must have been a great president because so many things have been named after him and built in his honor at our expense. So let's start with avoiding prison, stealing the top secret documents, implementing an insurrection against the Capitol, trying to take away the election that Biden had won, and trying to rig the election in Georgia. Each of those should have landed him in prison.
Well,
and
that's
almost
right.
did.
I mean, you don't want to. I know
he
that
ran out the clock.
The MAGA people don't like to talk about facts, but facts do matter, and we focus on facts here. As attorneys, as judges, that's what we're required to do, is under our ethical code to our profession. The number one, he was convicted of 34, 32 already. I forget.
34, yeah.
So
felony convictions.
I think I'm fairly confident he would have gone to prison on that alone. But then you mentioned that there were two federal cases: the case in D.C., Jack Smith case, and the case in South Florida. Even though the judge down there seems like she was in the pocket. I mean, for a federal judge, I've never seen and as a former judge, I've never seen a federal judge, and I've worked for federal judges. My first job was for a federal judge when I came out of law school. I've never seen a federal judge seem so one-sided in her rulings. And then so you had those two federal cases. Then you mentioned the Georgia state case, which unfortunately got waylaid with issues between the prosecutor, who I thought was a little bit, said more than she should have said, and the issue about whether she had a relationship with one of the attorneys. But that was a strong case. So we're going back to the point. I do think his primary goal, and he achieved it, was to avoid going to federal or state prison based on this all of this wrongdoing.
Then retribution against the people in government who, in some cases, such as the FBI, were simply career agents who were assigned the case to investigate his crimes, and because of that, they've been fired. They didn't express any particular political ideology. They're not supposed to in the Justice Department or the FBI. They're supposed to be independent, and they end up being fired as a matter of retribution, which Trump couldn't care less about their pensions or their careers or what the contributions are that they're making to this country. He just says, I want the message made clear. There will be no tolerance of anybody ever prosecuting me.
Well, there are two levels to this, and this certainly is a retribution tour. The one level is what you mentioned about how he's gutted the Department of Justice. We've talked about these issues week after week, and we will continue to talk about them. Anyone in that department with any integrity is left, and we'll be hearing a little bit later from our former DOJ pardon attorney who gives us a rant of the week every week. But yeah, just gutting, not just gutting the attorneys who prosecute, but also gutting the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, also gutting any integrity, the folks in the department who are in charge of addressing ethical issues. He's made the Department of Justice just a shell of what it was, and it's corrupt. It's corrupt. It's tragic, and I don't use those words lightly. Now, the second part of this quote retribution tour, which I think is ultimately going to hurt the party, and shame on the Republicans, and that they get whatever they deserve, is he's picking off anyone who dare challenge him in any way. These are people, and I'm going to mention the names. These are people that voted to support Trump 97% of the time or 99% of the time. But if you voted to convict on the impeachment, or we talked about Massey, and we'll talk about Massey with the Epstein. But if you do one thing, again, he's a mob boss, nothing more than a mob boss, and this is nothing more than a cult. Again, I don't say that lightly, but you look. There was Davidson in Louisiana, Cornyn out of Texas, two senators who had very good reputations. Who were he's like I remember the Indians got the scalp. I'm sure he's putting on the wall.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, John Thune, and we talked about this a little bit last week. Who's the Senate Majority Leader? This is not good news to him. He's not happy that Trump is picking off these current moderate senators for more MAGA senators. And I think we talked about with Cornyn in Texas, Ed. I don't think it helps the party. I think whether or not a Democrat, Tallarico can win, we'll see. But he certainly there's no doubt that he's got a better chance of beating someone like Paxton, who's a criminal, than Cornyn, who's had a very good reputation. As I mentioned earlier, was very close to being the Senate president. And then so you got Massey, who was one of the two Epstein persons, and as a Republican. So his retribution is, I'm getting rid of anybody in the legislatures who has done anything to question me. Again, it's like a mob boss.
And it carries on to his efforts to control the media, like CBS. He has just neutered 60 Minutes. He got Stephen Colbert kicked off the air because he's such a thin-skinned man-child that he can't tolerate any criticism of himself, even though he certainly warrants it through his incompetence. And so he wants to control the media message. And that leads to really how he's raking in an awful lot of money by shaking down the media outlets, as well as law firms, universities, businesses, through deals on the tariffs that he can control, and selling pardons. He's amassing a tremendous amount of money doing these things. Because through his life, he's never really been able to make any money in business. He's failed at pretty much everything. NBC made him a lot of money. He says he made them money, but he didn't know anything about producing TV shows. He didn't conceive that program, The Apprentice. They approached him, and he then told them that if he did it every week, he'd agree to it. So they went ahead and signed him for every week and made him a lot of money, showed him how to work at a camera and have a TV presence. And he was able to parlay that into the presidency. But now he can make money because the whores that represent the Republican Party just turn their backs on all the money that he's grifting out of the Treasury and out of sold pardons and crooked deals. And his sons is drawing a lot of scrutiny and criticism. Experts point out the potential for perceived conflicts of interest that the Republicans have no interest in. The Trump administration actively supports the federal financing and regulatory exemptions that benefit projects that they're involved in. And in response to inquiries regarding ethical implications, representatives for Trump Jr. have stated that he doesn't interface with the federal government on behalf of companies he invests in. There's a mining project that's going on that the sons expanded their investments. Well, let me start from the beginning. Don and Jr. and Eric had a roughly 20 million, 20% stake in a Kazakh tungsten mining venture. Through a shell company named Skyline, they invested in Cove Kaz Capital, which is developing the northern Katpar and upper Karakatik deposits in central Kazakhstan. That's exhausting to say. The project is backed by up to $1.6 billion in U.S. government-linked financing. So they expanded their investments in this Skyline Builders Group, which then reached an agreement to merge with Cove Kaz Capital. Skyline paid $20 million for a 20% stake in Kaz Resources, which is the operating entity formed by the merger. And then following that merger, Kaz Resources is expected to publicly list on the NASDAQ. The mining project viewed as a major strategic effort by the U.S. to secure critical mineral supply chains and reduce reliance on China. The venture capital that was secured was that, as I said, up to $1.6 billion. And it just makes what Hunter Biden was doing with his involvement in Barista just pale by comparison, because he was getting overpaid, that $50,000 a month from them. Yes, he was capitalizing on his father's position in government, but nothing to the extent that the Trump family is doing with deals all over the Middle East and with China.
Yeah, the two words that Ed we've used on the show again and again. One is unprecedented, and one is corrupt. The whining about Hunter Biden, there's nowhere near the billions and billions that this family, and I will call a crime syndicate, has brought in. Keep in mind, by the way, what he's done, and there's a lot to unpack in what you've said, and it's all valid. But when you started out talking about CBS and Paramount, what he's done. And it is just corrupt. He's said to these companies, if you don't do exactly what I want you to do, we're not going to approve a merger. We're going to create whatever issues you can with your license. It's no different, frankly, Ed, when I was a circuit judge from trying to milk that and said, well, because he took the power he had, Ed, and he's taken his administration under Stephen Miller, who I think is just as corrupt as they can come. This Project 2025, which has no respect at all for the balance of power and the separation of powers. But when we're talking, I think where we are on the road here is this enriching himself. We talked about last week this, almost what was it, billions and billions? Was it a couple? How much was that again? I for the moment, the DOJ fund, this slush fund.
Oh, the $1,776,000,000. Yeah,
almost $2 billion to reward criminals who it boggles the mind, and it's hard to really to discuss it even in a couple hours because it's so corrupt, and it's going to just take at some point accountability. I don't think the Republican Party itself is helped by this because it is corrupt. I think what's going to bring them down in November primarily is the economy, but with that will be accountability, Ed, going forward, which is a shame because we'll be spending a lot of our resources on which we have to do on showing the American public how corrupt this administration has been. But that takes away time and effort towards trying to solve some of the issues that this administration has never dealt with. And I think I wanted to mention just briefly one thing. He's made campaign promises, none of which he's done. None. No, he didn't talk about going into Iran. In fact, he talked about just the opposite. He promised he would not go into Iran. He said he would solve inflation would be down. It's not down. His Department of Treasury lies about that. That keeps going up. So he doesn't even focus on his campaign promises.
He said energy prices would be cut by 50% after a year, 18 months maximum. Instead, they've gone up by 50%. He said he'd resolve the war in Ukraine on day one or even before he even took office. It's still going on. Yeah, you're right. He makes all these and of course, he said he'd release the Epstein files, right? Well, he's going to do everything he can to keep that undercover.
Did he say it? He signed a bill in late November of last year, mandating within 30 days, which would have been, I think, December 19th of last year, that it all be produced, and over half of it has not been. So, again, I've Ed, I think it's important for us to convey to our listeners and our viewers on YouTube what the facts are. I know we're perceived as one side of the aisle, but these are facts, and at some point it should matter. I think back to my friend James Carville. It's always about the economy, stupid, and that's what I think is going to bring him down. But Epstein is not going away. Pam Bondi, our Tampa former Attorney General, is testifying tomorrow before the House Oversight Committee, and I'm looking forward to seeing if she has the same arrogance that she brought to that testimony a few months ago.
Yeah. Well, the core of that testimony does revolve around her refusal to have released the Epstein files when she was required to have done so on December 19th of last year. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And the other thing that people don't talk about, but the statute, which is only about 10 or 11 pages, and our viewers and listeners can pull it up very quickly, mandates that the Attorney General provide reasons why she or he at the time, does not produce certain documents. And she's not done that either. There's a requirement to say, if you haven't released these documents, you need to tell us why you've not released these documents. And she hasn't done that.
Yeah. And just as a footnote, it often intrigues me how conservatives or Republicans will hear what they want to hear and not what the facts are. I was on Freedom Works, Malloy's show a few weeks ago, and we were talking about something, and he said, all of the Epstein files have been released. He believes this because what he heard Todd Blanche say is, I'm not going to release any more of the files because those files undoubtedly contain extremely incriminating evidence of pedophilia on the part of Trump. And so he sees his job as that of protecting Trump. We've had one witness come out and say, yeah, I was 13 years old when Donald Trump raped me, and I was mixed up with the Epstein issue. Interviewed 4 times by the FBI because she was considered a very credible witness. And so, when Blanche says, I'm not going to release anymore, the conservative hears everything's been released and there's no evidence of any misconduct on the part of Trump. It's unbelievable how he can delude people or they self-delude to support him.
Well, I'd remind these conservatives who seem to want to follow the law that the statute mandates the Attorney General provide reasons for not producing these documents. That the Attorney General cannot just say, I'm not going to release the documents.
And don't forget to include the word unredacted documents.
That's
they
correct.
are not supposed to alter any of this stuff. They're supposed to release it all unredacted. I can think of no other reason that they're refusing to do it other than to protect the dear leader.
Well, Massey now was Thomas Massey out of Kentucky, lost his primary. And again, Trump was, I'm sure, bragging about that. But Massey was back on the House floor yesterday, banging away. We talked about this last week. I think these folks that lost their primaries have every reason for the next 8 or 9 months, because they're in office until late January of 2027, to bang the drum. Even Tillis out of North Carolina voluntarily left. These Republicans seem to gain a spine. Once they're heading out the door. Now, Massey again, he's a MAGA, but he, to his credit, believes that as a matter of right, it's not right and left, it's right and wrong, that the truth should come out. And you're right, when you're not producing documents, there's a strong presumption that there's a reason why you're not producing it. But the point here is, by doing so, you're violating the federal statute that Trump signed into law.
Yeah. You and I are baby boomers. We grew up in what would be considered white America. The TV shows only showed white people. I was reading about the Tampa Theater yesterday. The only black person that was allowed in the theater for something like the first 40 years of its existence was the custodian.
Yeah, I saw that.
We don't really relate to how minorities were so oppressed and kept in separate neighborhoods and segregated schools. They couldn't join the community in full for so many years. And now that we see the white population diminishing down to about 52%, I think, of the nation's population, the white nationalists are feeling seriously threatened in ways that we never even thought about when we were growing up, right? So along comes Trump and says, I'm going to get all these Latinos and immigrants and brown people out of the country and turn it back into a whites-only nation. And so when we ask conservatives, what policies of Trump do you really support or like or think he has delivered on? That's always the first one. He's sealing up the border and getting rid of the immigrants who are either not supposed to be here or who we don't want here, is what they're really saying.
Yeah, I think the critical point to keep emphasizing there, and I think that should be emphasized in this upcoming election, in terms of this perception that immigration has been one thing that he's successful on, which I don't agree with, because I think he's, as we've talked about, he's violated due process rights that have not been given lawyers. But his point was the violent immigrants. That's not what's happening, Ed. The people that are being affected by this are people that go to work every day. They pay, they pay taxes, they pay sales tax, they have taxes deducted from their salaries, and we've talked about the fact they're not. Again, contrary to what's been said, is a misstatement. They're not getting Social Security benefits from the government, although they're paying into it. But these are not violent criminals. That's a very small percentage. It's the everyday worker who's being affected by this.
Yes. And finally, of course, building monuments to himself. He's just seemingly can't run out of ideas to promote himself by putting his name on government buildings. The Fort Lauderdale Airport's being named after him. They want to name roads after him all over the country. Anna Luna wants his likeness carved into Mount Rushmore. And of course, the grotesque ballroom, 90,000 square feet that just dwarfs the White House, being built again as a monument to himself. It started out that Trump swore that private money would cover the $400 million cost. He said both he and supporters of him would put that money up. Now it's turning into an effort to get $1 billion out of the taxpayers to pay for the whole thing. And of course, the arch that he wants to build, which is just this reprehensible monument that will block the view and approach into Arlington Cemetery, all monuments that he wants to leave to himself to create the illusion that he's the greatest president in history.
One of the comments that Chris Griffin made last week was about one of the monuments, and you just made this point, restricts the view of Arlington National Cemetery. And I would tell you, with having two parents buried there, my father, who fought in Vietnam, to me that's somewhat offensive. But it's also very politically, it's very tone deaf, Ed, in a time when people are really feeling pinched in terms of the economy. The economy is not doing well. They can say all they want, but when the economy is not doing well, and he goes around saying, I want to have all these gold-plated this and gold-plated that, and monuments to himself, it's like North Korea. It's like Russia.
Right.
It's like Hungary. It's an authoritarian concept. But the MAGA people don't want to talk about it. All they talk about is that the liberal Democrats and Hunter. I don't know why they seem still obsessed with Hunter Biden.
The Atlantic reported that Trump now considers himself to be one of history's great men. He's no longer comparing himself to Washington or Lincoln. Instead, he lumps himself in with Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon Bonaparte. And really thinks that he's trying to reshape the world to his designs in ways that they did, but he might be kind of overlooking the fate of those guys. He might want to ponder how things panned out for the trio. Alexander died at age 32, possibly of malaria, typhoid fever, or poison. His vast empire was ripped apart as his generals engaged in a fit of fratricidal warfare. Caesar was dispatched at knife point by former friends and supporters, and for the founding fathers became a byword for tyranny. Napoleon, meanwhile, perished in exile on a damp and rat-infested South Atlantic island, bitter to the end about his failed imperial project. History can lift a man to greatness, but it won't guarantee a happy ending.
Well, it's interesting when Trump said he's not sure he's going to heaven.
But I also think about what happened with Cesar Chavez, who during the 60s was such an effective advocate for the farm workers of California who were so exploited in that industry, as a result of which a lot of government institutions were named after him, probably parks, schools, roads, maybe some monuments, until it was revealed very recently that he had been involved in sexual misconduct and abusive of women. And now California is taking his name off all of those government institutions and dismantling his memory, not so much for what he accomplished, but because of what kind of a person he was, which leads me to think that it may be that 10 years from now, the dismantling effort will be underway to tear all these things down that Trump's trying to get built. They'll pull his name off the Kennedy Center. They'll rename the airports and roads, depending on how things turn out and how bad they could potentially turn out under his mismanagement.
Well, history will not be very kind with Trump. He's a flawed man. He tweets at all hours of the day and night. If you showed a person, I don't waste time reading many of his tweets, but they brought to my attention, he's not a healthy man. By the way, he went and had his physical this week. He's going to be 80 in a few weeks. He's obese. He's not very healthy, and he says it was perfect. That's his favorite line. But there is always a challenge, I think, Ed, between what someone does. Like you mentioned Chavez, the FBI was bugging Martin Luther King. He was having, affairs.
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. But so there is a challenge between what someone accomplishes publicly and what their private life may not.
But
or may
Kevin,
be.
if it is proven that he was a pedophile and mixed up with Epstein and did rape girls as young as 13 years old, I think that could then be the impetus to really erase his legacy in the same way he's trying to erase the legacy of Barack Obama or Biden.
I agree with that. And unlike, Obama, who was obviously much younger when he became president, who's still a force in the party, Trump will not be. I mean, he's very old and he's not very healthy. And I don't wish him any ill, but he's not going to be a force in this party for a long period of time. But beyond that, that's a very serious allegation. But just the corruption, the financial corruption. But the issue we've talked about many times, Ed, with this Epstein issue is, some of the other issues we raise take time to kind of understand. People very quickly understand if someone's a pedophile.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're going to pause for a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear our weekly rant from Liz Oyer, the Consumer Confidence Report, maybe a little about the European heat wave and more of the issues the conservatives.
Joyride. Feel free to hop in and have a good time with us every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. This show is brought to you by One Unit, dedicated to bringing people together, letting your voices be heard. And of course, we're here to entertain you, upbuild you, inspire you, and even hear from you. So every Thursday, tune in to 106.1 FM, Brandy Joy Joyride, and we will hear from you and let's have some fun.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
During his 2016 campaign, Trump ran on the slogan, "I'm with you." It seemed ridiculous for this selfish and self-centered con man to present himself as being for you, the people, but somehow he pulled it off. Not once, but again in 2024. In his second term, the aging demagogue is no longer disguising his insatiable narcissism. This month, Trump's Florida golf course unveiled that 22-foot-tall bronze statue of the dear leader covered in shiny gold leaf. A preening Trump boasted about the love of fawning followers who came to pay tribute to this glittering monument to his unwarranted ego. Trump's vanity is also fueling his plan to build a massive gilded triumphal arch directly in front of Arlington National Cemetery, a grotesque intrusion on one of our most sacred public spaces. For years, Trump fooled millions of Americans into thinking he cared about them. Only a conservative could fail to see the unavoidable truth. Trump is only for himself. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Ed Golly with Kevin Carey on Voice of Reason here on WTAN, 37 minutes past the hour. In this week's rant, former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, Liz Oyer, is going to explain what plenary authority is and why Stephen Miller is attempting to implement it.
Lots of you are asking about plenary authority, which is a phrase that Stephen Miller used recently on CNN. It's important to know that what Miller said was not an accident or a mistake. It's actually an idea that he's been talking about for a long time, and it has to do with Project 2025. I have to start with some basics. Our Constitution divides power among three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the courts. The founders wanted to prevent tyranny by making sure that no branch could get too much power, so they created this system called checks and balances. This is a problem for Stephen Miller and the other creators of Project 2025. They are trying to implement an ultra-conservative vision for America in just 4 years. But checks and balances make it hard for any president to quickly make major changes to our country. They have a strategy, though. It involves consolidating and expanding the power of the executive branch, meaning the president. That's where plenary authority comes in. Plenary authority refers to power that is absolute and unrestricted. The only area where the Constitution gives the president plenary authority is over pardons. Presidential pardons cannot be reviewed by Congress or the courts. In all other areas, the president has to share power with Congress and the courts. When Stephen Miller used the phrase plenary authority, he was talking about the National Guard. Miller says the president has unlimited authority to deploy the National Guard whenever he wants because the Constitution makes him the commander-in-chief of the military. This is wrong. The Constitution actually gives Congress the authority to decide when the National Guard can be deployed. The president can only deploy the Guard in specific, limited circumstances defined by Congress. The Constitution also gives courts the authority to review the president's decisions. So far, every court to consider the question has found that the president does not have plenary authority to deploy the National Guard. The important takeaway is that Miller and his team are working aggressively to expand the powers of the president. They are intentionally testing the limits of checks and balances by ignoring Congress and the courts. This is how they are implementing Project 2025. Miller's comments on CNN took some folks by surprise, but what he's doing is not a secret. It's happening out in the open all throughout government. Virtually every news headline nowadays ties back to Project 2025's plot to expand presidential power. The courts and Congress can push back on this, and hopefully they will. But remember, we the citizens are the last line of defense for our democracy. We can demand more from our reps, and we can vote out of office all those who support empowering an autocratic president.
Well, once again, she speaks the truth. The challenge we have, we've talked about, our democracy is a three-legged stool, and if the other two don't stand up, the stool collapses. And both Congress and also at the higher level, the judges have failed in their obligation on the separation of powers. So we obviously this is a very important election in November. I think the Republicans understand that if it's a free and fair election, they will lose, and thus you're seeing this cheating, which is this redistricting, which I don't think is going to work. By the way, I do think there will be a blue wave given the poor economy. But her point about plenary authority, and her point was making this is Stephen Miller following through with the 2020 project, is right on point. And so, what we can do out of hope and energy, and I think we try to do it here every week, Ed, is just point out these issues and encourage people to get involved and vote and register to vote. So we'll see how the next few months play out. But this will be certainly a different world if the Democrats can take one or both of the houses in Congress.
Well, as positive an image as he attempted to display at the cabinet meeting this week, he really is in a dilemma because he started this war in Iran, I believe, to deflect from the Epstein files, and he did so successfully because nobody's talking about it now. Until tomorrow, anyway.
Right.
But think about it. If he ends it, we're back to calling for the release of these files unless he maybe stirs up trouble somewhere else, like Cuba. And that's not really so easy because Iran, remember, is populated by Muslims who are considered dispensable to us as a so-called or self-defined Christian nation. But, they're the wrong religion, but not Cubans, because not only are they predominantly Catholic and Christians, but a lot of them have extended families here in the United States who would not take too kindly to seeing their family members killed by an invasion by a self-serving president. And then ask yourself this: if Crooked Donald is such a brilliant negotiator as he claims to be, why didn't he negotiate all these issues that he wanted from Iran before going to war in the first place? Well, I submit there's two reasons. First of all, he's not an accomplished negotiator at all. And second of all, going back to where I just started, he did it to distract from the Epstein files. And here's why. When he came into office, he tore up this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is called the JCPOA, which was commonly known as the Iran nuclear deal. And it's a landmark 2015 diplomatic accord between Iran and the P5+1, which means the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, and Germany. And it required Iran to drastically scale back its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of international economic sanctions. This is the agreement he tore up only because it had been structured under the guidance of Barack Obama, of who he is insanely jealous. So he told us, oh, it was a disaster. It was the worst thing ever. He never told us why. He just said it was horrible. We had to back out of it and tear it all up. Now he's trying to negotiate it back again. Here are the core components of that agreement. Iran agreed to limit its uranium enrichment to 3.67%, which is a level suitable for energy production, but far below the 90% threshold required for weapons. They had agreed to this. Iran reduced its stockpile of enriched uranium by 98% and limited the number and types of centrifuges that it could operate. Also, the heavy water reactor at Arak was redesigned so it could not produce weapons-grade plutonium, and the Fordow facility was repurposed for peaceful research. And finally, Iran granted the International Atomic Energy Agency extensive access to monitor and verify compliance at all of its nuclear sites. So the deal pushed Iran's breakout time back hard and was verified by international inspectors who reported to the world every 90 days. So now along comes Trump and says, oh, that's a bad deal. We got to tear that up. Now, what's he trying to negotiate? What is the fundamental reason he says we're doing this? Because Iran can't have a bomb. That's where we started. And the Republicans don't get it.
Oh, Ed, he's begging to get back to a place we won't ever get back to. Let me be very clear. Iran is winning this war. This war is taking place in their backyard. And what Trump fails to do, because he doesn't have the desire or energy to bring in other countries, as you just mentioned, Europe is not, they're not doing any favors for us. We're taking on the world here. This has not been something that's been, you don't see countries joining us in this other than Israel, which I think saw a benefit to this, but there's some problems there too. You never saw the Strait of Hormuz issue being leveraged by Iran. Iran they have no problem going forward. They're killing us with these very cheap drones. They perceive as the truth, and that this is a very unpopular war, and they're going to leverage this against Trump. Trump is going to get nowhere near the elements you just mentioned that was under the Obama provision back in 2015. On top of that, he's created a world economic crisis because of the oil not getting and fertilizer not getting through for other countries, and that's further given power to China to go to these countries. So none of this has been a positive thing. He never mentioned going to war with Iran. In fact, he promised just the opposite when he ran for office.
And now if he's able to come up with anything, it's going to be a fraction of the JCPOA dressed up in red, white, and blue bunning and sold to the rubes. It's a miracle produced by a true genius while he's working our way backwards.
There was never any issue in the campaign in 2024 about this issue with Iran. And by the way, they claimed that their bombings last summer knocked out the vast majority of Iran's nuclear capability, which is contrary to what they said the reasons were in February of going to war now. So none of it makes any sense. They never thought through the issue of that they would at some point that Iran would play this card of blockading the Strait of Hormuz. They never even thought about that. They claimed they did. They never thought about that.
I think probably the military understood that could happen, but the Hawks talked Trump into believing that just wasn't going to happen, and then what do you know? It happened.
And by the way,
he doesn't know how to get out of it.
Another week, another cabinet member is gone. Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, that's right.
So we every week it seems like someone's gone. I think our buddy Patel is probably the next to go.
So far, they've all been women.
That's an interesting observation.
And see what he's facing is the U.S. consumer confidence, which has declined slightly this month as fuel prices stay high, inflation's elevated. And that's pretty much of a contrast to the soaring stock prices that are hovering around 50,000 for the Dow, record prices. which doesn't really tend to help the average working.
The average Joe
middle-class.
doesn't have stock. The average Joe is not looking at the S&P every night at 5 o'clock. And by the way, if this war continues, I don't think you're going to see the Dow. But that doesn't affect the average person. And when you tell someone, and this is his ultimate problem he's got, Ed, when you tell people, which he's done, he said that this affordability issue is a hoax.
Yeah.
His words, it's a hoax.
Democratic hoax.
Absolutely. And he's also said this is not the concern about that the average person paying the bills is not a primary concern for him right now. When you tell someone that it's not a problem, and they know it is a problem, Ed, because they're sitting there deciding what bills they can pay when they're being, their house is being foreclosed, they're being evicted as a renter. So they know that what they're being told is a false bill of goods, and they don't really care about the S&P because it doesn't affect them that much.
Right, exactly. And these increasing fuel and food costs are adding to inflation, which is outpacing the average growth in paychecks, which then, of course, reduces most Americans' purchasing power. And that's leading to, I think, the people in this country are catching on. They're souring on Trump's economic policies. Polls show it. It's potentially creating problems for Republicans heading into the midterm elections that there just may not be enough time, no matter what happens in Iran, to reverse that course and start making the economy looking better. We've heard one of them said at the cabinet meeting, this is the greatest time in history to be an American. Yeah, because you're a billionaire. It doesn't matter to you, but to the average American, things are getting tougher. It's getting harder to make ends meet, especially here in Florida.
When you see a war in Iran that they're spending $1 billion a day, not a month, a day. You mentioned $1 million a day on this Alcatraz fiasco down in South Florida. None of those things, as Anders was saying too about Florida, none of those things aren't issues that the average person is caring about. The average person is concerned about affordability, getting health insurance, being able to raise their family. And wages have been stagnant, Ed. Part of the problem with inflation, if your wages are increasing ahead of inflation, is not as much of an issue. But that's not happening. The average person is not getting a very high increase in wages.
Yeah, the consumer confidence survey shows that confidence is growing among households with incomes at or above $100,000. That's a lot of jack, but it's falling for pretty much everyone else, everybody below that. And so this whole prospect of higher prices and faster inflation is looming over confidence readings. I'm hearing now predictions that we'll be in a recession next year. I know a lot of it hinges on what happens with the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, as I've said before, it's getting late early, as it would say in sports.
Yeah.
I mean, Memorial Day, we've talked about, people say the bad issues about Trump have been baked in already. Consumers now who are struggling, very much struggling, Ed, to make ends meet. And I don't know if you read the statistic. The average person doesn't even have the money to fill up their tank of gas. They literally are going to the gas station and getting 5 or 6 gallons of gas just so they can get across the bridge or get to work. They're not filling up their tank of gas. So they know there's a problem. And the only way the Republicans can deal with that is to change the game, which has been completely unprecedented. But we'll see what happens. Again, if I were a Republican, I'm not sure what I would go to the stump and brag about in the next few months. I mean, they were afraid to have these public
town hall meetings.
Absolutely,
they're getting really scared at those things too.
And we've been very specific and clear on this program, Ed, that over the last 18 months, the Democrats have overperformed at a pace of 11%. So if that continues, that does mean everyone's going to win or lose. But it certainly means if you're in a purple district and you won by less than 10% in 2024, you've got a significant problem coming up in November of 2026.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the only hope that the Republicans have is that this whole issue in Iran gets wrapped up in time to bring fuel prices down. But as we're always told, the prices will drop slowly, not quickly.
And Trump has acknowledged that. He said he's not convinced. I don't understand from a politics standpoint, Ed, what the thinking was other than a distraction, which it won't be. How do you go into Iran and think that's going to turn out well? And I think you're right. Maybe the only people that understood that were the military. Now there's also talk, the people like, the Secretary of State was against it.
But don't you think that a lot of that had to do with how successful the raid in Venezuela was? So he thought, oh, we'll just do that again.
Right, but that's they were so incomparable, so different in comparison.
Sure.
Anyone
But
with any
he doesn't
knowledge
understand that. I mean, Trump thinks he's brilliant and a brilliant tactician, but he's an idiot, and he doesn't listen to the people who can tell him the truth. He listens to the people who tell him what he wants to hear.
That's right. He doesn't have anyone in his cabinet who's competent. Maybe Rubio. These other people are all incompetent.
You're right.
And so he doesn't want to hear the hard news. I really don't think he understands the reality, because I think they're even afraid to tell him the reality.
That's the scuttlebutt we're hearing. Yeah.
Right.
Is that everybody thinks as long as they tell him what he wants to hear, they keep their job. But as soon as they stand up to him and say, this isn't going to work, then they're out and they're replaced by another sycophant who will tell him whatever he wants to hear.
But there was never any concept that this going into Iran would be successful. This is exactly what you could have understood was going to happen before we went in and dropped the first bomb in Iran.
So just declare victory and withdraw. Let the strait open and get back to normal. That's his best option.
Trump, who's got the ego of a maniac, he's begging Iran, and they've got all the cards. We're playing in their backyard. They've exercised leverage, or talking now, even if they open the Strait of Hormuz, that they would start charging tolls like it's the New Jersey Turnpike.
Yeah.
So they're going, hey, gosh, thank you. You've given us weapons we never thought we had before.
Yeah. And he boasts about how he's decimated their military. If that's the case, how are they controlling the strait? And the answer is they have the kinds of weapons that are very hard to remove and get rid of, as if we ever had the right to go in and sink their navy in the first place. I mean, that's a war crime. We had no right to go in and bomb these people and destroy their military. We had no inherent right to do that. Well, that's just a war crime.
The commentator I heard this morning, and I agree with him, is that this will go down as one of the greatest military failures in the history of this country. Wow. It's a sad state, given this is our 250th anniversary of this democracy, that we're in such a fragile position. But again, you don't see any of our allies coming to our support, because he treats them with the back of his hand. Why would he think that they're going to come support him at this point?
Yeah. One last thing I wanted to get to before we run out of time is this deep ocean heat is moving closer to Antarctica, which is threatening the stability of the continent's ice sheets. A new decades-long study confirms that a warm mass known as circumpolar deep water has expanded and shifted toward the Antarctic continental shelf over the past 20 years. So it turns out the ocean absorbs about 90% of the excess heat caused by global warming. Most of it's stored in the Southern Ocean, which is just where you don't want it, because as the waters underneath these ice sheets warms up, it risks destabilizing Antarctica's ice shelves, which play a key role in preventing inland ice sheets and glaciers from flowing into the ocean. Now you think, well, so what? A few glaciers break off. Not so simple. Joshua Lanham is the study's lead author, and here's what he said. I'm going to quote him. The collective amount of fresh water in these inland glaciers could raise sea levels by about 190 feet. They're probably the only dry place in Florida would be Bach Tower, which would be an island. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It's incredible.
And you can't turn that around, right? You can't refreeze those glaciers once they melt. Now that, of course, he's talking about all of that ice going away. But what we're hearing is that it's melting faster than the climatologists had predicted 10 to 20 years ago as we continue to accelerate the use of fossil fuels, which accelerates the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. He says in 2022, global average sea level reached a record high of 4 inches above 1993. That's half of the 8 to 9 inches the sea level has risen since 1880. So you can see it's happening at a geometric accelerated pace. The rate accelerating because of melting glaciers and ice sheets adding new volumes of water to our oceans. And besides increasing the risk of coastal flooding, rises in sea level also contribute to more intense storms. So stronger hurricanes, bigger, slower moving storms, stronger and more tornadoes, droughts, and wildfires become the result of all of this.
And that's what's been happening. We've seen it. We've had we were lucky last year, but we've seen it with the storms we've had over the last few years. But everything that he does really is against what we need to do in terms of the environment.
It is, yeah. Promoting fossil fuels is the exact opposite thing that we should be doing. But that makes him money, and that's all he cares about. Time for our quote of the day, Kevin. It's from George Orwell, and here's what he said, quote, "A people that elect corrupt politicians, imposters, thieves, and traitors are not victims, but accomplices." Well, join us. Yeah, I'll second that. Back next Thursday morning at 9 o'clock for another edition of The Voice of Reason. I want to thank my co-host Kevin Carey, along with Anders Croy of Florida Watch. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if a statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it. Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater.